Not a lot of time. So I'm Alan Tomkins, and let me introduce my colleagues. First speaking is going to be Eric Luftman, and we are all from the Department of State. Eric is from the Bureau of Economic, Energy, and Business Affairs, and Caitlin Welsh is going to be next. She's from the Office of Global Food Security, which is where I am from. And then Marcella Szymanski is going to finish it up. She's also from the Bureau of Economic, Energy, and Business Affairs in the Ag and Biotech Trade Affairs Division. So Eric, why don't you take it away, and while we do that, we'll try and get the PowerPoint.
And I didn't have a PowerPoint presentation anyway, so this gives them some time to work on that. So I wanted to start by laying out some ideas, basic ideas. When we talk about food security, we need to separate out at least two important ideas. The first one is pervasive or chronic hunger and undernutrition. The second one is price volatility, food price volatility, or price increases. Food security itself, we tend to define as freedom from hunger or from fear of hunger. And there are several dimensions of that. On a household level, food security involves having a reliable and consistent source of quality food, first. Second, sufficient resources to acquire it. Third, the knowledge and sanitary conditions to ensure good nutrition. And fourth, the stable conditions to sustain all of the above. So first, let's look at chronic hunger and undernutrition. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization reported last year that 925 million of the world's 7 billion people were undernourished. That's and 98% of them in developing countries. Undernutrition contributes to 5 million deaths of children under 5 in developing countries each year, while millions more suffer permanent damage to their physical and mental development. Now, world population is projected to peak around 2050 at 9 billion. And the FAO calculates that to meet projected demand for food, world food production has to increase by 70% by 2050. But in Africa, where agricultural productivity is dramatically lower, production must double to meet the projected demand. So how does a 30% increase in population between now and 2050 translate into a 70% global increase in food production or in food demand? First, not only are we talking about more mouths to feed, we're projecting that there will be adequate food for all. But also, as incomes have been increasing in the developing world, there's been a steep rise in demand for animal protein, and that means much greater demand for animal feed and use of plant feed. The FAO has classified 25% of the world's agricultural land as highly degraded, meaning that it was close to rendered unable to support agriculture. And only 10% of it is classified as improving. So while we may be able to increase agricultural land a bit, most of the increase in production has to come from increased productivity. According to the Global Harvest Initiative, which is a project of a group of American companies and NGOs working on global hunger issues, crop yields are growing currently at about 1.25% per year. Now in Africa, where total production needs to double by 2050, as I mentioned, to meet expected demand, productivity growth needs to accelerate from 1.25% currently to about 1.4% per year. To achieve that, we need improvements in all kinds of biotechnology. Much of that is traditional biotechnology, traditional breeding of plant varieties and animals, tissue cultivation, plant cloning, fermentation processes, and many other types of traditional biotechnology. But also, we're talking about modern biotechnology, genetic engineering, and Marcella will be addressing that in more detail, some of the things that we're looking to biotechnology to accomplish. We also need more efficient agricultural techniques, tillage, drip irrigation, land conservation, and so forth. And we need, very importantly, we need reductions in waste through better methods of harvesting, storage, transport, and distribution. And also, I might mention on a personal level, we could all be doing more individually to adjust our consumption patterns, and that can play a part in helping increase the availability of food globally. We've been doing that with energy conservation, and we've seen how important energy conservation has been in the overall energy security of the world. The same is true for food security. International food prices now. Let's look at that issue. Food prices have been characterized by periods of relative stability, punctuated by short periods of price spikes. Though famine and chronic hunger have been with us since recorded history, food security catapulted recently into public attention during the food price crisis of 2007-2008. In the world's poorest countries, the sharp rise in rice, corn, and wheat prices drove millions of people living on the margin into hunger that year. But what really got noticed was what was going on in middle-income countries, places like Mexico, Philippines, Indonesia, and many others, when a vicious cycle of rising prices and hoarding behavior caused food staples to become scarce in some local markets and fueled panic. Food security became an issue of physical security when riots occurred in many urban areas in 2007-2008. But this was a market failure. It wasn't a real shortage of food globally. There actually was just as much as ever to go around. So what happened? Early signs of price increases led some governments in Asia to ban rice exports. This may have contained domestic prices for those countries, but it tightened supplies elsewhere and compounded the effect on international prices. So for some countries, prices tend to be controlled through various techniques. So they looked to those export bans as a way to put a cap on the effect of global price increases on domestic prices. Fear of further increases led to more export bans along with hoarding and panic buying. And countries that continued to sell rice began to charge record prices. Have we learned a lesson about export bans? Well, not yet. Very recently in 2010, when drought and wildfire had reduced Russia's wheat production by about 20%, the Russian government banned exports of wheat. What happened? International wheat prices jumped 70% over 2 months. We recently experienced another steep increase in food prices globally, but without the panic or shortages that we saw in 2007-2008. So it doesn't necessarily have to lead to the same types of panics. What we had in 2010 were steep price increases, almost as dramatic as 2007, but without all of the riots. How do we address the issues? The centerpiece of the U.S. government effort is Feed the Future. This is the U.S. Global Hunger and Food Security Initiative, led by USAID with active participation by the State Department, Department of Agriculture, Treasury Department, and several other agencies. And it's very much a whole-of-government project. The 2007-2008 food price spike was a relatively short-lived phenomenon, but it lifted governments out of complacency for 3 decades of low prices. The last event before then was 1973 to 1974, so we actually had a long stretch when the real prices of food had been declining, and the idea of investing in agriculture became a back burner issue. So, as an indicator of the low level of attention that agriculture had been getting, by 2008, funding for agricultural development worldwide had dropped to less than half what it had been in the 1980s. At the 2009 G8 summit in Marcella, Italy, the U.S. announced a $3.5 billion 3-year pledge to implement global hunger and food security initiative, which became Feed the Future. The pledge helped leverage more than $18.5 billion from other donors at local level. Feed the Future focuses on 20 countries in Africa, Asia, and the Western Hemisphere, providing investments in agriculture and nutrition. Feed the Future investments are driven by needs identified by the focus countries themselves. This idea of country ownership is one of the so-called 5 Rome principles, and it's a key part of what makes Feed the Future a new approach to agricultural development for the United States. It helps avoid past situations in which donors fund agricultural programs in a scattershot approach with little coordination, and instead places the development strategy under a single plan and developed and coordinated by the focus country itself. To To qualify, a focus country first develops its own country investment plan and its implementation roadmap. The U.S. then draws up its Feed the Future investment plan through strategic documents aligned with the focus country's investment plan. Feed the Future investments may include high-quality agricultural inputs, infrastructure for post-harvest delivery of products to market, financial services, diet quality and diversification, and building capacity for agricultural research and extension, among various other possibilities. Another fundamental aspect of Feed the Future is a focus on gender integration. Women are the majority of agricultural workers in over 30 developing countries, and an average of 43% of the agricultural workforce in developing countries overall. Yet they're often excluded from community decisions and denied access to inputs, training, and finance. So Feed the Future investments will contribute to redressing this imbalance and will unleash the untapped potential of women in agriculture. So with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Caitlin Welsh, who will give an example of some of the Feed the Future work in Africa.
Thank you. So I'd like to talk about the United States government's Global Hunger and Food Security Initiative, Feed the Future, that Eric introduced. As Eric said, Feed the Future has its roots in the meeting of the G8 in 2009, where the G8 countries endorsed a new approach to addressing global food security and also put forward a total of a little bit over $22 billion to address food security. Later in 2009, 193 countries endorsed this approach that was first articulated in Italy. So it became a widely accepted approach to addressing global food security. So that happened in 2009. In early 2010, the United States launched Feed the Future. Here is the goal and the associated two objectives of our Global Hunger and Food Security Initiative. So as Eric introduced, the approach of Feed the Future is not to address food insecurity where it exists all over the world, but to concentrate our funding and our programming in particular countries. So there are 20 focus countries worldwide, 12 in Africa. Countries are chosen based on 5 criteria, as Eric mentioned. One of them is level of need of the country. So what's the level of poverty and hunger and undernutrition in the country? And also what's the opportunity for partnership with that host country government? We also look at the potential for agricultural growth in that country and a couple of other issues. So in each of the countries in which Feed the Future focuses, we create what we call a multi-year strategy. So we can think of this as a 5-year plan for how the United States government is going to go forward and address food insecurity there. So the multi-year strategy, the 5-year plan, is created with input from multiple United States government agencies. So as Eric said, it's USAID, United States Department of Agriculture. It can include the Department of Commerce, Peace Corps, Millennium Challenge Corporation, always the State Department. So whatever United States agencies are active in these focus countries contribute to this multi-year strategy. And another thing about the multi-year strategy is that it matches up to what the country's own plans for addressing food security are. Eric had introduced the principle of investing in countries' own plans. So as we create our plans for addressing food security, we match it to what the country itself wants to do to address its own problems. So I'm going to give a case study of one of the countries, one of our focus countries. I had the chance to visit Senegal in September of this year. And I got to tour some of our Feed the Future projects when we were there. Something about the multi-year strategies is that, again, instead of saying that this is the country we're working in, we're going to address food insecurity across the whole country, what we do with the multi-year strategies generally is we try to focus on a particular geographic region or regions, and also particular value chains. So in Senegal, we chose 2 regions, one the Senegal River Valley and one Southern Forest Zone, based on the number of people that are suffering from food insecurity in those regions. and the potential for agricultural growth in those regions. And we also chose 4 value chains. And a value chain you can think of as everything that happens with an agricultural product from farm to market. So including developing seeds, improving soil quality, growing the product, processing it, storing it, taking it to market. In Senegal, we chose rice, maize, and millet. So when I was in Senegal, I got to visit some of the projects that are focusing on developing the rice value chain. And these projects are located in the Senegal River Valley, so kind of near where the 2010 number is up there. So that's where I went and saw 4 things. First thing we saw was this is a rice demonstration site where they test different types of rice seeds and different cultivation methods. So we were told that in the plot on the left that the irrigation process hadn't been worked out right, and you can tell on the right the rice was growing a lot better. We saw a seed certification lab. So this is where seeds are analyzed and where they're certified for what kind of rice they're going to be growing, and also in a bag of rice seeds, what kind is going to be growing, what % purity is it, how many of these, what % are going to grow. So each bag is certified with something that looks like that. We saw a rice mill, and this happens to be a sustainable rice mill. So what happens is rice hulls are burnt, which creates energy to mill the rice. So this is the milled rice, and on the left is the burnt hulls that are then used for fertilizer, for growing other agricultural products. And then the last place we visited was a women's microfinance organization. So through funding from USAID, microfinance organization was started, and it helps to give women the opportunity to purchase agricultural inputs so that they can take part in this income-generating activity. As Eric mentioned, this is a major focus of Feed the Future. So again, you can see all the activities that we saw to improve one of the value chains in one area of one of our Feed the Future focus countries. So to talk about the impact of our investments worldwide, it's really early right now in Feed the Future. So again, this is a 5-year program for each country. The first year in which we programmed money is 2011. So we just started programming money this year. Within the next couple of weeks, we're going to have collected data on these initial indicators. These are not the only things we're going to be, the only areas we'll be collecting data on in Feed the Future. There are over 50 areas that we'll be collecting information on, but these are just some initial ones we chose to kind of take the temperature of how we're doing with Feed the Future. And then the results, we hope, and this could be adjusted, hopefully not too much, but this could be adjusted at some point. But what we hope at this point is that we'll achieve over 5 years the results that these here.
Quick question. So, especially in Africa, how is this at all working with groups like the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, or other sort of quasi-governmental nonprofit efforts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely is. So with AGRA in specific, yes. In the countries in which, in 2 ways. So AGRA is active in countries that are not only Feed the Future countries, but focus countries, but additionally. So USAID has missions in those countries, and we're working all over, with that. But especially in focus countries, we do cooperate with AGRA. And then also in focus countries, there's a big push to coordinate not only with other U.S. government agencies, but other civil society organizations, nonprofits that are active there, in cooperation with those governments.
And just to add to that, a big part of the country plans that drive the process, the country-led process, is consultation, close consultation with all stakeholders, including civil society organizations.
So what is the driving goal for you as the State Department in this project? Is it to alleviate or to address the food problem, or is it to help countries to improve governments in other countries, so that other countries, I mean, you're running these projects, but you're cooperating with a lot of groups, and you were also talking about how ownership is important. So then what is your driving goal? Is it for other countries to govern food better, or is it for the food issue to be addressed because it will impact the United States?
We, you can go back to the goal and the objectives. So our most immediate goal and objectives have to do with alleviating chronic hunger in these countries. After 5 years, through working with these host country governments, we want, number one, we want to have built up their agricultural systems so that they're stronger, and that when price shocks or climate shocks happen, they can withstand those. And number two, we want those countries to be able to take over, not 100%, but to take over the running of their country plans to address food security.
And that's a good segue, I think, into Marcella's, who will talk about one of our specific dimensions of long-term security. So what differentiates this from others is its focus on medium and long-term security as opposed to acute humanitarian needs.
Hi, I'm Marcella Szymanski, and I work at the State Department in the Agriculture and Biotechnology Office, but I came in as a scientist in agriculture and genetics, and also a background in economics. And Caitlin was talking about seeds, and that's a really good, also another good segue. Another good segue, because when we talk about agricultural biotechnology, specifically genetic engineering, we're talking about the technology is in the seed, and so it's available to large and small-scale farmers. I want to give you a kind of an overview when we talk about agriculture and climate change and sustainability, food security. How does agriculture fit into all that? I want to just give that kind of context. And then I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about, when we talk about genetic engineering, what's the policy role and why is it so crucial? The second thing I want to talk to you about is this technology's been around for about 15 years. What have we learned from it? And we have a lot of data collected over the past 15 years. And then lastly, what is the State Department doing to work in the policy arena with agricultural biotechnology, and how are we trying to make sure that the countries that can get the most advantage from the technology are going to be able to make use of it? Okay. It's you. Okay. So, Alan talked about productivity increases that are going to be needed. That's this line here. Okay, we know that in the next 50, 40 years, that's going to need to happen. With climate change, this is going to need to happen. We're going to have to produce that much more to deal with the effects of climate change. Do the next slide. So, I don't know if you've ever thought about it. How much does agriculture actually contribute to climate change? Would you think it is more than the energy sector or less? And it's actually, if you look at the combined effect of forestry and agriculture, it's pretty dramatic. It's actually more when you combine it than the energy sector. We don't hear about that, about the effect. Yet, something like if you add these two sectors together, ag and forestry, they're about 70% of the land use of the world. So this is pretty dramatic. So, next slide. So you have the effect of agriculture on climate change. Then you have another part of the picture. What about sustainability? What does agriculture contribute? This is a slide from the USDA, and what I liked about it is look at this last 85 years of what we've planted. It's actually stayed the same, or maybe even a little lower. Now look at the red line in productivity. It's very dramatic. And the only way we've been able to do that on the same amount of land is through the use of science and technology. In the 40s, hybrid, maize, And then later on, you have things like agricultural biotechnology coming in and other technology. So that really plays a key role in sustainability. So you can hit. And so when we talk about policy role, we're talking about a technology that has a lot of controversy with it. I mean, how many of you have heard of when they were, I'm calling it genetic engineering because that's how we prefer to talk about it, but some people also call it GMOs. And so when that word is heard, this is, it's fraught with this kind of passion and controversy, but really what this does is distract people away from the real importance of having a policy in place that enables countries to make use of the technology. Countries need biosafety laws and regulations in order to do research. And if that's not in place, they really can't make use of the technology because it is regulated. There are really 3 decisions a country can make in terms of policy. I'm not going to do anything, I'm going to ignore it, so I'll put no policies in place, can't use the technology. Number 2, they can say, well, I'll put laws in place, but I'm going to make sure I strictly regulate it so much that I'm going to be extra careful. And what happens is you have some countries like Ethiopia that put biosafety laws and regulations on the books that'll actually, if you're a researcher, you can go to jail for doing research. And so that's another way that, well, you can't really make use of the technology. And then there's a third option. You can work through, put the laws and regulations on the book, and use the technology, make use of it when you're ready, when you want to. I think a really good way to illustrate this, the next one, but don't get it again, is to tell you a tale of 2 farmers in 2 countries. 2002, farmer from Mali, if you ask, wow, who's the leading producer of cotton? Now, he'll say Egypt and then me. He's from Mali. Burkina Faso, the farmer's silent. Fast forward to 2006, now you can hit it. You have, Mali has a biosafety law written, but they haven't passed it yet. Mali's passed the biosafety law, and hit it again. 2009, now you have a product commercialized, BT cotton. BT cotton is a cotton that has a natural insecticide in the seed. It's the same insecticide, by the way, that we use in organic farming, but the plant makes this. It's been genetically engineered to make it. And so the other farmer now is getting very dramatic benefits in a short time. As you can see, the yield, the less pesticides, and also a rise in income. This is extremely dramatic. And that's why in places like India, for example, that adopted this particular technology, BT cotton, they've turned around as a net exporter in a matter of 3 years. It's very, very dramatic. Next slide. So I want to give you a kind of, the second thing I would talk about then is what have we learned in the past 15 years? So if we look at, in terms of global greenhouse gas emissions, we know that from using the technology, which has enabled no-till agriculture, which has enabled soil sequestration to happen, we have the equivalent greenhouse gas emissions equivalent to having 7.2 million cars less on the road. But you could say in a world without biotech, that wouldn't be possible. If we didn't have the technology, we would have 8.8% more pesticides used globally. We would have if we didn't have it, we'd have 229 million less tons of food produced. And that would have meant we had to employ 185 million more acres of land. And some of this might have been on marginal lands, and certainly forest lands. So it's had a very dramatic effect, and now we have things like drought tolerance that are coming online, where research is going to be done. In the U.S., we'll have drought tolerance in probably a couple of years, drought tolerant corn. This work is going on in Africa. We have things like nitrogen use efficiency work that's going on. And I want to make sure that when you go away with the idea, this isn't just about corn and soybeans in the U.S. Work is going on in Kenya in terms of water-efficient maize. In Uganda, work is going on disease-resistant bananas. Nigeria is working on virus-resistant cassava. The Philippines are working on golden rice, or this vitamin A enhanced rice. So the technology is broad. It's a technique. Next slide. So the third thing I wanted to mention to you is in moving forward. So what do we see as an area of the world that we should be reaching out to, who could really make use of the technology to address the coming challenges of climate change, food security today, and sustainability? If you look at this, the area in green, these are the 29 countries that are growing biotech crops now. The area yellow allows the import and movement of crops. This area, there's only 3 countries that have commercialized. Kenya is going to be coming soon. They just passed the biosafety law in a matter of months ago. So this is the area of the world, and you can again, where we see the most potential to affect the lives of farmers. And so we're doing a number of things. When we talk to other countries, our assistant secretary has been doing a lot of outreach to the African ambassadors and has worked with some ministers of agriculture from Africa, and he's saying to them, look, this is what we know about the technology. You can choose to adopt or not, but if you're at all interested, start thinking about the regulations you need to put in place and make sure they're science-based. Then the second thing that we're doing, our U.S. Agency for International Development works with commercial production, things like disease resistance in local plants like bananas. But they also work on policy areas like getting the necessary knowledge to put a biosafety system in place. So we work in both areas. Then we work on South-to-South cooperation. Brazil is the second largest producer of biotech crops. And they have their own, they have a lot of similarities in soil types between Africa and Brazil. And so they have their own story to tell in adoption. And so we've been working with the Brazilians in Mozambique and in Uganda and kind of sharing their experience. And then lastly, working with the private sector like the Gates Foundation. There's a project called the Water Efficient Maize for Africa project that's developing drought-tolerant crops for countries like Mozambique and Kenya and Tanzania. So what I want to leave you with here is this idea that definitely agriculture has a role to play in climate change. It affects climate change, and we know that we're going to have to intensify agriculture. We know that there are countries that are going to do this at different rates. You know, the EU is a biotech producer, but you don't think of it. But there are countries that produce, but their expected rate of growth is only expected at 4% in agricultural production. Ours is like 10 or 20, and Brazil a whopping 40%. So countries that are not going to decrease their demand, they're going to export that demand to other places. And so we know we have to double agriculture by ag production by 2050, that's often cited. So we're not saying this is the only way to do it. We're saying this is a tool, and to make sure that it gets into the hands of researchers and can go forward.
So we're the State Department. We follow policies, and the policy says we have to wrap up by 1:30. So unlike other U.S. government agencies, which we're going to be out of here. So we have 1 minute, 2 minutes for questions, comments, etc.
You have this picture of the BT brinjal thing.
Yeah.
So the issue, if I remember correctly, with BT brinjal was essentially the fact that people were not happy eating sustainable modified food. That was the big thing. And I think the concern that the government of India had essentially is that there's not been enough testing going on, they wouldn't really show whether it's good. So I think that could be an issue of concern. Cotton is fine, I mean, it's a cash crop, it's not going to be eaten by people. But when things come to eating, and so that fear is still there that whether it's good enough or not, so how do you plan to, how do you plan to address it?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because that's it. Food has a certain connection to us, and that is where the real controversy is. And so, with the thing about the brinjal, you know, the thing is that because of the pesticide use is so heavy, there's already problems with the conventional. But one of the ways it's addressed is, you know, you have to have confidence in your regulatory system. So we have, all over the world, we have the European Food Safety Union, the US, Brazil, all these have worked with these BT crops and found them to be safe. But all I have to say, it's a personal decision, and so India has to come to terms, do they want it or not? And perhaps the entry of eggplant was not a good food crop. Maybe it should be in one where pulses, where, you know, this is where India really needs a growth in the ag production. It's a good question.
So I'm passing out 2 of our little informational postcards for your information. More information about our Feed the Future project is on www.feedthefuture.gov. So, all right, one quickie, and then I think we got to stop.
What kind of input does your office have into global policy making, like the debates at the WTO about these issues? Because part of the food security would depend on your trade access U.S. might provide on cotton or bananas in Europe, or, you know, the way a lot of African countries feel between European controversies about genetic engineering or GMOs versus the U.S. push for it. So does your office work with USTR or the places?
Yes, yeah, we do, because our office is involved with trade, and you know, the country has a biosafety law that's going to be trade disruptive. They're supposed to notify the WTO. So we do work with USTR a lot, as well as USDA.
Thank you very much for your time and attention.